Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next episode of Revolutionary Reflections. I'm your host, Alex, and for this episode, I want to talk about where the United States is headed. And what I mean by that is the direction of a right wing, fascist, authoritarian government. Now, you're probably wondering, what do you mean by that? Well, ever since Donald Trump got elected for his second term, he has since, one, laid off or fired a lot of federal workers, so the federal administrative state is becoming less and less effective, as well as increasing the ICE budget. Now, for those who are wondering, ICE, the Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, is a agency that pretty much is focusing on immigration enforcement. You know, if you need documentation or anything, that's what it is, right? And a lot of the activities that ICE pursues is not a criminal. They're not doing criminal enforcement. It is civil enforcement, obviously, despite what the media would like to present it as. You know, it's still part of its mission. However, Trump has pretty much increased its budget significantly, hiring more and more people for it. And as of late, ICE has been not as receptive as it was originally. There are lots of videos out there where ICE officers are going to construction sites, farms, factories, and all these things, arresting what they deem as illegal immigrants or migrants. But it later turns out to be that people are there on a visa, or they're actually U.S. citizens. And there's been a court ruling where it says, ICE could pretty much profile anyone that they seem as a potential undocumented migrant. Now, undocumented and illegal is used together. They're mostly indistinguishable from each other. But with ICE, being able to profile people, you could just be anyone that might look Latino, and they'd be like, "Hey, let me see your documentation." Which, if you're a U.S. citizen, you technically don't have to show documentation. You could just ask, "What makes you think I'm illegal? I'm a United States citizen," right? Because a lot of people are United States citizens that they are arresting, and there has been a lot of things like excessive force, intimidation with ICE. So effectively, it's becoming something similar to the Gestapo or secret police. And a lot of these undocumented, or people that they deem as undocumented, are mostly held in jails that are basically like camps. A lot of people conflate them with concentration camps, which is pretty true because a concentration camp is pretty much a camp or a correctional facility where you have people who are of single ethnicity, religion, race, whatever, or a group of people who meet that definition are being held, right? Like the Japanese internment camps during World War II. That was technically a concentration camp, but we just call it an internment camp in the United States as taught by the school system. And then, like I said, a lot of excessive force, and like I said, there's a lot of videos out there where ICE is just profiling people nonstop. And they're mostly headed towards Democrat cities like Chicago. Trump wants to send them to New York. Los Angeles was the first one. Portland is the next one. And what's really shocking, or not shocking really, is if you recall, I think it was the last administration or Trump's first administration, where states like Texas, right, would bus undocumented migrants who are waiting for their documentation get sent to New York, Chicago, LA, all these places, right? And then when Trump comes in, he's like, "Hey, I see the problem here. Let's go in and go fix it." Even though the problem was created, for example, by Governor Greg Abbott, who bussed a lot of these migrants around the United States. Now, this is one of the many examples of how the current government of Trump 2 is headed towards a fascist authoritarian government. Um, One other way was it NPSM 7, which pretty much says, hey, if you think you if we think like these indicators of violence like anti-Americanism, anti-Christianity, um, anti-racist, it's like really weird things. Um, then you might be what they call Antifa, or someone that opposes the government. Even the thought of insurrections, right? It's like thought crimes. Even if you just say it casually but not seriously, it's basically a thought crime. And it's primarily targeted to people who on the left, people who are centrist, people who are Democratic Party, and people who identify as conservative, but like traditional kind of conservatives, not whatever conservatives are under Trump. They're just something else. And like I said, NPSM 7, pretty much like in its current state will pretty much target like people who are leftists, people who are Democrats, people who are identified as Antifa, even though Antifa is like non-centralized, not non-centralized, decentralized. There you go. That's the right word for it. It's just a group of random people who oppose fascism. That's what Antifa is, right? Antifa is anti-fascism. So removing that or putting that as like, hey, if you're Antifa, you're going to jail. Which is having its parallels with Nazi Germany and fascist governments during the 30s, 40s, 1930s, 1940s, I should say, because they all targeted their opponents as radical leftists, communists, if you're homosexual, all these things, right? If you fit in that category, you're either going to jail or they're going to come after you one way or another. Right? Because having an opposition to anything you want to do prevents, like I said, prevents anything that you can do. Because as long as there's an opposition, you can't really go as far with things. However, the Democratic Party in the United States haven't been much of an opposition to Trump for some reason, but will be a major player in the future in terms of how the United States is going to go. Because, liberals, historically, especially during Nazi Germany, capitulated significantly towards Hitler and his government, where they just pretty much let him take over. And either they got arrested or they assimilated somehow and just ignored all the atrocities that happened during World War II. So, having opposition like that, the silenced, is one way to do it. He's also attacked freedom of speech, freedom of the press, right? Because let's go freedom of speech, for example. It's mostly targeted towards any anti-Israel sentiment, which, they conflate Israel with Judaism. And if you speak out against Israel, you're anti-Semitic. That's not true. Because Israel is not, Judaism. It doesn't have anything to do with Jews. Israel is a state founded in 1946. And the IDF, for example, are just 3 terrorist organizations. There's a whole history. I will probably talk about that in a later episode. But like if you're pro-Palestinian but anti-Israel or anti-Trump, you will seek things like you're getting your visa revoked, your passport revoked, not letting you in the country if you're visiting for some reason. If you said anything on social media, like anything that you speak about that would normally be protected, right? Because a lot of things in the United States, right? You can say things like, not my president, I don't like this administration, I oppose this government, for example. In some other countries, you go to jail for that. In the United States, we have the luxury of saying things like that, as long as you're not saying anything threatening to, political or members of the government or against each other, like, violent crimes or anything. But if you just say it like, not my president, that's just that, that's your opinion. Like I said, other countries, they would most likely jail you for that, or keep a closer eye on you. And then for not freedom of speech, freedom of the press, how that one's becoming targeted. Um, Trump has always been known for calling CNN and MSNBC, CBS, ABC as fake news. You're fake news. You're fake news. You report lies. Newsmax, Fox News, they're my friends. Type of thing. I think it was last month or a few weeks ago. They were talking about, you know, only report what we tell you to report, and that's it. Which is basically a way of censorship of the media, which is something that the founding fathers chose to put in the Constitution, right? The freedom of the press, because back in the colonial era, most of the press was controlled by the king, by the monarchy, so they could just say whatever, be like, hey, the colonists are revolting. Look at these monsters, type of thing. And they kept it in there as part of the integral part of the Constitution. Now with Trump and his administration being like, hey, only report what we tell you, that blocks that eliminates that part of that Constitution, that amendment. A lot of the media already capitulates to Trump as is. They'll just report things like, hey, like these riots in LA, very bad, very bad, very bad. Even though the riots in LA didn't turn out as riots, they just turned out as protests, and then you have the police and National Guard and ICE, pretty much antagonizing them, right? That's pretty much how all protests spawn into. So by removing freedom of speech, freedom of the press, now you pretty much have grounds for, extreme censorship of any viewpoints, right? You could just say, I don't like Trump, and then, you could end up in jail type of situation. And yeah. And for those who are wondering how the United States has moved in this direction over the years, a lot of people always point to Ronald Reagan, and I do believe that Ronald Reagan was the catalyst of all this happening. But a lot of it has to do with a lot of the Nazi scientists and Nazi collaborators that were brought over into the United States through Operation Paperclip, because America after World War II was severely anti-communist. I mean, they were always anti-communist even before the end of before World War II started. But who fights who does more anti-communist things than normal people? Nazis, right? People who we fought against World War II, right? And you could say, well, the Nazis didn't do anything in the United States, right? In the government, they probably had some effect in the government, because remember, during World War II and not World War II, after World War II, the Cold War, you had things like McCarthyism. The anti-communist sentiment was pushed heavily after World War II, up until the fall of the Soviet Union. It still exists to this day when it comes to China, but a lot of generations, like the baby boomers, Gen X, fall heavily against the anti-communist side, even though they have no idea what communism is, or even socialism, because communism is when you have no house, you don't own anything, government controls everything. The latter part is true, because government does control how the economy works, but that's just a normal functioning economy. Even the United States does control the economy in some way. Agriculture production is one of them. You could technically say oil production, because we hand out drilling permits to oil companies to extract oil, for example. But it didn't really come into full swing until about Ronald Reagan, because Ronald Reagan was, anti-labor, but he was pro-big business, pro-corporations, pro-wealthy, right? Because most of his reforms were, let's cut taxes for the rich and the corporations, and it will trickle down, right? Known as trickle-down economics, which never actually happened. People are still waiting for that, obviously, but still never going to happen. So what that allowed was that corporations and the wealthy was able to accumulate so much money and every policy since then, right? Whether you're Democrat or Republican, Republicans pull this heavily more than Democrats because Democrats are still playing a balancing act, but Republicans, every time they're in office, they do tax cuts after tax cuts after tax cuts, while slowly dismantling the federal government, right? Because they always play we are a small we love small government, while increasing big government at the same time. We're increasing in areas where it doesn't matter, right? Or I mean, it does matter, but it doesn't matter for the average person. So this leads to a whole chain of Republican, Democrat, Republican, Republican, Democrat, Democrat, Republican, Democrat, right? To switch off between parties, especially since the 1990s and 2000s and above until now. Because every time there was a Republican president, there's either a conflict going on or severe tax cuts. But like, hey, we're pro business. We're gonna give these guys tax cuts. But then slowly but surely, it diminishes the social safety nets that exist in the United States, like Social Security, for example, right? We'll talk about, we're like, hey, Social Security is gonna run out of money. We haven't increased Social Security tax at all, and most of the people who pay for it is the citizens, right? The working class and middle class. The wealthy class barely pay anything into it, right? And every tax reform that Republicans put in place, Barack Obama also implemented some form of this as well, where the upper tax bracket for the wealthy and the corporations are like 24%, for example, which is not much because it's for everyone else, right? From the working class all the way up to middle class. As you get more money and pay, right? Everything's bracketed off at certain brackets. So, let's say you pay 10% of $5,000, and then next bracket is like 12%. Going off my head on this one, and you pay, like $10,000, and after that, or the next $10,000, let's say. So pretty much your tax rate would be like, let's say for example, you pay $2,000 in taxes throughout the whole year, for example. Whereas if you're the wealthy, you probably don't pay more than $50,000, for example. You probably should look that up. I'm just going off the top of my head at the moment, but they don't really pay any more taxes above that at all. And because they park their wealth in assets, so stock market, private equity, real estate, technically they will not be taxed until they usually sell, which even if they do it, it's still a favorable tax rate because capital gains tax, right, for the case of stocks is a slightly lower tax rate than it is for income tax, for example. So they're paying even less money than the average person. And when that happens, it creates an imbalance between what the administrative state could afford, to repair the roads, to make new freeways, replace bridges, upstaff the air traffic control, for example, and do more research, right? Because with less money that the government has, it has to get money somehow. And most of the money that the government receives is through the working class and the middle class, small to medium businesses, right? Large corporations also don't pay very much in taxes either. For the average person, if you see like a corporation be like, hey, we got paid $2 million in taxes, it's relative to the size of that company. So it looks like they're paying a lot, but relatively to the size of the company, they're basically paying like 2% of a tax rate, for example. And then pretty much every policy they do, economic policy that Republicans do, will cause a like short micro recession of some sort during administration or after the administration. So when the next administration comes in, usually Democrat, they'll be like, hey, the economy's been worse under this administration. And the average person will be like, yeah, it is. Why is that? The average American citizen does not take account for the time delay, right, between policies, because any policy that, say, Trump enacted during his first administration didn't really come into effect until, like 1 or 2 years after he stopped being president, because it's all a delay. And he could just use that at the point and be like, hey, everything's worse, vote me in. And here we are with Trump too, where people voted him in for, lower grocery prices, lower gas prices and everything. But in reality, nothing's changed. Everything's increased, right? Because he's tariffing every country that the United States imports. And mind you, the United States doesn't manufacture very much of anything within the United States, because the profit motive for companies is, why do it here if we could just over outsource it to China, for example, where they can manufacture for cheap. They have the tooling and everything. And when Trump became president, he wanted to bring all that manufacturing back. However, he gave him so little time to bring over the machinery and learn the techniques, because everything requires machining, and most of the machining is in China. And Trump was like, we're going to do 100% tariffs. Now, that machine is going to cost 2 or 3 times more than it would have before he came into office. And then without those machines, there's no manufacturing, right? It's a give and take. Now, before I stray too far off, going back to, how the Republicans do tax cuts and everything, they'll always point back to the previous administration, which would not be Republican in this case. They'll be like, hey, see, they made everything worse. You vote me in. Because the key is for the Republican Party is, how much worse can we make the living of American citizens so they're forced to vote us in, because the perceived image of it's the previous Democratic administration that made everything worse. So by them doing that repeatedly over the course of 20 or 30 years, now they're back in power, pushing a fascist, nationalist, authoritarian type of thing, or type of government, because fascism pretty much comes into play when, the average citizen is angry because they can't afford anything. But also, the wealthy and the corporations want more profit, right? More profit somehow. So the only way to fix it is to vote in a fascist type of government, which, a lot of people have said before Trump got elected is like, hey, he's going to deport a lot of people and it's not going to look good. Which, became reality when people start seeing people getting arrested in the grocery store, at construction sites, and videos are surrounding the internet. And by manufacturing this false sense of the problem was created not by us, but by them, and the continuation of this victimhood, right? Because you're the victim. Everything's not your fault. It's everyone else's fault, even though, said party created all the issues. As long as everything gets worse, people vote in a fascist government to fix everything. And it turns out they're not at your interest. And that's something shown by Trump very heavily, is that he only cares about the wealthy and the corporations because they have so much more to gain, right? Tax cuts, government contracts, and all this stuff. And with the privatization of the federal government, it allows them to get more from the Republican Party. Be like, hey, you want to run air traffic control? We'll sell it to you. Just make sure it runs good. And then take over, privatizing air traffic control. Now, of the 10 people that you have in the air traffic control room or control tower, they fired 8 of them. So now there's only 2 people running the whole thing. And then when accidents happen, people are like, hey, why isn't the government stepping in? The government's like, we can't do anything about it. It's not us, it's them. And it creates this weird cycle where private corporations have more to skirt regulations and everything. Because what hurts corporations more than anything? Regulations, tariffs, and also taxes, right? Give me some tax breaks. Give me some money, right? Hey, I'll run your military software for you on our servers. You just give us the money, we'll be good. And that And that cycle has been created for so long, right? Because the military industrial complex is one of the very well known examples of this. There's a video out there where they were like, "Hey, why is this screw or the screwdriver cost $10,000, but for the average person it's like 5 cents, for example?" And it's all because it's a blank check, right? The Pentagon is like, "Hey, how much do you want for this?" And then just spit back a number, like, "All right, here you go. Here's some money." Knowing that they're overcharging the government, which is taxpayer money, right? And unfortunately, like I said, Trump doesn't care about the average American. He only cares about corporations and the wealthy. So what does he do? Sells off bits of the government as the Republicans intended, and all the tax dollars that would normally go to the government to maintain and run it is now going to a private company that will run it maybe at half the capacity as it normally would be, right? One of the possible things is the the weather the weather systems in the United States. There were talks about selling that off to a private corporation, and that's a lot of money, right? If a private company gets their hands on it, they have to control all information, because the weather isn't run by normal people wondering if it's going to rain tomorrow. It's run by companies, trucking companies, airlines, forestry, shipping. Everything runs on weather data. And if any company manages to get hold of that, it's just infinite money at that point. And that's one of the dangers of Trump and the Republicans in the United States, is that they're willing to sell off bits and pieces of the government of the United States to private companies who just want to make money, right? Because that's the ultimate goal. How much money can we make, and how we're going to do it. So by that, they start making everything worse in the United States. But hey, we cut taxes, but look, everything's still worse. I think we got to get rid of it. So they get rid of it, right? So like the voter base of Trump, for example, or the Republicans, they're like, "Hey, what has the government ever done for us? They don't do anything." Well, because you defunded them the last two administrations, the last 10 years, and you just expect it to work somehow. This is not like a corporation where if you reduce the headcount, it somehow magically works better. It doesn't work like that, right? If you get rid of 5 people looking at weather patterns all day, and you cut 4 of them, so you just have one guy, now he's doing the work of 5 people. He's not going to work any better than if there was just 5 people there, right? So this idea of the government doesn't work properly is all manufactured. And Trump was able to play into that. He's able to play into, immigrants are an issue. You're the victim. They're not. We got to get rid of them. So ICE increases. ICE raids increases. National Guards in place. Even yesterday, Trump talked amongst the generals and admirals in Virginia with Pete Hegseth. Pete Hegseth was like, "Hey, we need a military, clean shaven, physically fit. If you can't meet those requirements, the military is not for you." And Trump is like, "Hey, the enemy's within in these Democrat-run cities. Look at all this crime. Even though the crime data shows that crime is reduced in all these cities that he's talking about, but it mostly plays into how these cities played during the election, right? Because they all voted Democrat. Because popular contrary belief, people who vote Democrat mostly see like people who are from other countries, like who immigrated into the United States. So you're open to more culture and everything from people who are from different backgrounds than if you live in a suburb, which mostly votes Republican. So every time Trump or Republicans try to have an election, all these cities don't vote for them. Why? Because the policies of Republicans is to, what can we do to deport your neighbors? What can we do to make your lives worse? And then people in the cities are like, we don't want that at all. Why are you hurting us the most? We're just trying to live our lives here. And you decided to do what? Do you want to send ICE over here? Yeah, no. And people in the suburbs like, yeah, cities are terrible. They're dirty. They're crime ridden. Um, this plays well into the manufacturing of consent, right? Because the news media only reports like the crimes are happening here. There's always violence. There's always this, that, and everything. And then people like Trump and people who vote Republican, they see that they're like, oh, we can't have that. No, no, no. We need to go. We need to send the military in there to fix it. Um, so that military meeting, that meeting with the generals and admirals in Virginia, Trump pretty much says, "Hey, all your we need to go into these cities and straighten them out." What does that mean? It could possibly mean deploying the military, right? Active duty military members within the United States. Because before, he only sends ICE and the National Guard. The National Guard are pretty much state militias because they're run by people who join the army, but they only do it in a part-time basis. So since the National Guard is like part-time, because they do military part-time and they have like an actual job outside of that, and they also know their neighbors, right? So by deploying active duty military, you could bring someone from Iowa, from Kentucky, into California, for example, and they could just not care. They could just start doing everything, right? They'll start brutalizing people, for example, which is one of the things that the National Guard doesn't do. They just be like, hey, my orders is to stand here, protect this federal building. Okay, that's all I'm going to do. But with active duty military, you have people from all over the United States and its territories, and it sets a very scary precedent. Or if he does deploy active duty military, are the generals going to fall into the orders? Because now you're going against American citizens as if this was a civil war. And as with most conflicts in the world, right, the Boston Massacre was one of them. Even TV shows like Andor, which is based off of real life events, where there's an agitator that shoots one of the stormtroopers or one of the officers, and then it turns out to be a firefight. If one of these soldiers who are actually deployed, who he actually deploys in the United States, shoots like a protester and kills him, that will most likely spark a civil war, because now you have the citizens being like, hey, wait a minute, why are you shooting us? We're your citizens. We are the same people, and you're shooting us. So every little bit of movement Trump does in his current administration, right? We haven't been 1 year yet. Is headed towards authoritarian fascism, because everything he does is catered to white Americans in particular, especially if you're Christian. Most likely evangelical Christians in particular, because evangelicals have more power within the federal government since Reagan, because they're like his biggest voter base. And, he's able to play into the "we are party of the Christians," which invoke a lot of different people, right? Because you have people who are religious, who are evangelicals, but you also pull in people who are national Christians, right? People who are Ku Klux Klan, people who are neo Nazis, people who are white supremacist groups, all pulled in together now, and now they have full control of the government, which is showcased by this current administration, right? Stephen Miller is one of those people who are, commonly known to spit white supremacist rhetoric, right? Even Pete Hegseth himself is also known for this. And with them in play, they're able to pull into everything and then pull into the voter base. Like, hey, we can fix everything. Vote for us. We'll take care of it all. And that's currently what's happening within the United States. They are taking care of it. However, people are pushing back. And that's a good thing, because with this full right-wing fascist, authoritarian, nationalist type of government being in play, if more people are recognizing, hey, these ICE agents are using excessive force, tearing families apart. They target me, not me personally, but in this example, they target me because they assume I'm illegal. It it really draws the line. And like I said, well, when I brought up the military meeting thing that was publicized, by the way, I'm hoping that the generals, the military, who recognize that, hey, why are we turning against our own citizens? What do you want? What are we doing here? Right? Because if you're a general or an admiral within the military, right, if you're top brass, you've seen how the world works. You study the world. You study, how coups happen, poor military leadership, how military juntas start. Right? A lot of these guys are well read. They even know how the federal government works. So hopefully they are able to recognize patterns, if any, right? Because there are patterns here. There are parallels with, Nazi Germany, for example. Hopefully they are able to recognize that and be like, hey, we're not going to follow orders because we swore to protect and uphold the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That's who we took an oath to. The president is not we do not follow the president. We follow the Constitution. Even though the Constitution has been severely eroded over the years and is getting pretty much deleted by this administration. And hopefully they recognize that. Because we are fortunate to have a country where if the military doesn't take an oath to the president, they take an oath to the country. And if the country says, hey, turn against your own citizens, hopefully, they think about it and be like, hey, we're not following that orders. That's against the Constitution. We don't want to do that. That's against our country. How about we turn against you? Because that is a possibility, right? I mean, there were even TikToks, so people have been like, I'm in the military, but Trump is not my president, and I don't like him. So hopefully there is anti-fascist type of rhetoric, or sentiment, I should say, not rhetoric, within the military, and they're able to recognize that, hey, things are getting worse. Hopefully, everything gets better, or even if we have to, we do the military junta. Hopefully not, because like I said, the United States is very fortunate to not have any military coups in its entire history. Granted, the United States has used the military against things like workers, for example, to break up labor unions. So it's a really weird predicament within the United States, where we are a relatively stable country when it comes to the military and the government, but it's also a very scary moment where will the military do anything if the government starts breaking more of the Constitution or even rewrites the Constitution, right? Because that's one of the things Americans are very proud of. We have the longest running continuous Constitution in the world, or so they claim, because it's never been rewritten. It's never been, thrown out or anything. It's always been amended to some degree, but the base Constitution has very much been the same since the founding of this country. But yeah, I'm hoping that more people recognize, hey, everything's getting worse, but not getting better. Let's vote you out. Or, in hopefully situation that doesn't happen, do military coup. I'm not condoning that, by the way, but that is a possibility because, like I said, the military has the strongest power of anyone in the United States, right? Because if you piss off the military, then they're like, oh, we have the tanks, we have the missiles, we have everything on our side. You have nothing on your side. You don't piss off the military, no matter what government you are around the world, even if you're Donald Trump, because they'll just throw you right out. But yeah, I'm hoping there is significant pushback against Trump and what he's doing in the United States, and hopefully more people recognize that quickly, because there might not be an election in 3.5 years. There might not be any midterms. We might be stuck, and I don't think anyone's gonna come to help us this time because this is our fight. and we've caused so much pain and suffering around the world. Other countries are going to look at us and be like, oh, do you need help? No, we're not going to help you. You bombed our country, you overthrew our government, and you killed our people. Why do you think we're going to help you? Unless it overflows into other countries, then yeah, they'll start pushing back. And then we will look like Nazi Germany during World War II, where we overextended and countries are pushing back. Who knows what happens at that point? So yeah, I really want you to think about what's going on in the United States currently with Trump and his current administration, and if you like how it's going, and if you don't, join the protests, organize. There are a lot of people out there who don't like Trump and what he's doing within the United States. You're not alone. You might be alone if you live in a severely Republican area who are Trump supporters, but you're not alone. There are a lot of people outside around the United States who see this and recognize this, but all they could do is protest and show, hey, we're not happy with this. This is what we're going to stand up against you, type of thing. Until we get major backing from law enforcement, right, local law enforcement, the National Guard, the military. It's just the people versus the government, basically. But hopefully, yeah, like I said, hopefully nothing gets worse. If it does, it's going to be a long journey. Because politics is depressing, right? Ever since I followed politics 4 or 5 years ago, it's very depressing. But it's better to be depressed and informed rather than uninformed and depressed. So yeah, like I said, think about everything and review how everything's going within the United States. Like I said, if you feel like, hey, I don't like this, organize, protest. Like I said, even if you don't organize, there are probably people around you that feel the same way. So the key is to find those people and talk to them. But yeah, I'll see you guys in the next episode, and hopefully it's not as depressing as this one. I'll see you guys later.